Hey guys, it's the nerd half of this Nerdtroverts duo, and I am back for the second part of my half-yearly book wrap-up. This time, I'm talking about the books that I read in the first 6 months of 2018 that I didn't like, I hated, or I was indifferent to. So once again, I have my little fake book box, which has all of the books that I have read, and I will just be pulling them out randomly and talking about them when I get to them. There are a couple series in this list, so I'll probably talk about them all together as opposed to each individual book because I pretty much read them straight after the other. If there are books in here that you absolutely love, this is not like a personal attack on you, and it's not always that I hate them, it's just that I'm mostly indifferent to them. Alright, first up, The Hangman's Revolution, which is the sequel to The Reluctant Assassin, which is in the Warp series. So The Reluctant Assassin and The Hangman's Revolution are part of a trilogy. I think I have not read the third one. They're both written by Ian Colfer, and if you recognize that name, it's because he's the author of the Artemis Fowl series. These books I didn't hate, and I actually am thinking about continuing on the series, but I think the main problem for me was that the pacing in these books kind of sucked. The chapters were really long, and you really felt the length of these chapters. Like, I'd be reading them and be like, oh, like this is a 60-page chapter, it's dragging on forever. I don't think they were 60-page, I think the biggest was maybe 40. Actually no, there was a 60-page chapter in this one, and it was a lot. So the plot of these books is basically there's time travel involved, which is always a bit of a messy thing to sort of deal with because it's time travel and consequences and stuff. But basically there's this like evil assassin, and there's this book is not bad and the plot is actually very interesting. It's just the writing style that really made me put this in this video as opposed to the other video. If it wasn't for the very long chapters, I probably would have really loved this series, and it's super upsetting that I didn't love them because I wanted to. Next up, King's Cage. King's Cage is by Victoria Aveyard, and it is the third book in the Red Queen series. I don't know how many books are in it. I know there's at least one more after this. Red Queen I enjoyed. The second book, The Glass Sword, I didn't enjoy as much. It definitely suffered from the sequel problem. This one I did enjoy. So you're like, why is it in this video? Because of the ending. There's this one character who has this like one drive for the entire book, and then at the end he just gives it up for something else that he's never shown any interest in really wanting. And it just frustrated me all to hell, and I think it was for the shock factor, which just really pisses me off because when people do things for the shock factor, it really annoys me. If you don't know what the Red Queen series is about, it's basically about these two sort of groups of people, the Reds and the Silvers, and the difference is their blood color. The Reds have red blood, the Silvers have silver blood, and also the Silvers have powers. And when the protagonist, Mare, who has red blood, discovers she has powers, she does so in front of like a whole bunch of Silvers. And so the Silvers are like, we need to control this, and the royal family is like, oh no, she's actually royal and she's a Silver and she just grew up red for reasons that we're gonna make up, and she has to pose as a Silver and all this stuff, and like the Silvers are evil, and you know, well, not evil, but they're just like, they're the rich and the oppressors, whereas the Reds are the oppressed and the poor. It's very symbolic. But anyway, the series itself is an interesting concept, but this book itself, just the ending just pissed me off so much. So much. Isle of the Lost. Isle of the Lost is by Melissa Dela Cruz, and it is the prequel to the Disney movie Descendants, which is the Disney Channel original movie. I loved Descendants movie when it came out, and Isle of the Lost, like, I didn't hate, I was just pretty indifferent to. It actually focuses on all the villains' kids. So you've got the daughter of Maleficent, the daughter of Evil Queen, the son of Jafar, and the son of Cruella de Vil. It's all about them living on the Isle of the Lost and like them trying to be evil and like be what their parents want them to be and all this stuff. And the book itself wasn't bad, it was just like sort of weirdly paced and the chapters were a little weird. And I just wasn't like overly invested. I didn't dislike it, I was just pretty indifferent to it, and I don't know if I'm going to read the others by her. I just don't really think that I'm that invested in this series. To be fair, it is children's fiction and I am in my 20s, but yeah, so I'm just indifferent to it. Oh, this is the series that I didn't want to talk about because I know it's people's favorites. And it's Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. So this trilogy is Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, Hollow City, and Library of Souls, all by Ransom Riggs. This is not a dislike or a hate, this is more of an indifferent to, and it's not because the story was bad, it's not because the writing was bad, it's because I wasn't invested. I discovered around Hollow City that I just was not invested in these characters in the way that I should be, and that made reading the story just not all that enjoyable. The thing that is most notable about this series is the pictures that are shown throughout the book which relate to the story. So like, you know, you got the picture on the front, this picture is about a girl in the story and it will be in the story, as well as like all these other old pictures that have been edited to fit the story. I really enjoyed having this element in the books. I thought it added like a whole new layer to the stories, which was really cool. My only issue is that a lot of the time certain paragraphs or chapters felt like they were only there to relate to a picture, which is frustrating. It just took away a lot. Like I found myself being drawn out of the story to look at that picture when it was supposed to actually draw me in, and I think that is a big part of why I was pretty indifferent to the series. I didn't hate it, I did read it all and I did like the ending, but overall I was just pretty indifferent to all the characters and everything that happened. The only book I really liked was Library of Souls, which is the third one. The other two were just okay. So if you don't know what Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children is, it's about this boy called Jacob whose grandfather dies, and when his grandfather dies he leaves him instructions to go find this school, this island where Miss Peregrine is the headmaster, and find all these children that his grandfather had told them had these like magic abilities. Jacob doesn't really believe him, but like he also saw how his grandfather died, which was not like a normal way, and his therapist thinks that it's good for him. And so he goes and he meets kids that can like float and kids that can like control fire and kids that are invisible and all this stuff. And it's all about him finding them and him finding his place in the world, I guess, and discovering who he is as a person and who his grandfather was as a person. It's a good synopsis, it's a good story. I guess like you have to also remember that I'm in my 20s and these books are not really aimed for a 20-year-old, they're more aimed for a younger adult and like children, like young teenagers. And so that I think also played part, and I was just also indifferent to the characters. But the story itself isn't bad. Oh dear. Lord of Shadows by Cassandra Clare. Yep, this is on this video. So I have read pretty much all of Cassandra Clare's Shadowhunters books. I think I've read every single one of them. I liked Lady Midnight. I liked that a lot. I did not really like this book. And I think the main problem is that I stopped giving a crap about Emma and Julian as a couple. And pretty much as characters. I don't really like Emma as a character, I think. Like, I like her as a character, but like, I don't like her. Does that make sense? Like, as a character, she's cool. But like, I just don't like reading from a point of view. Like, I really just don't care about what happens to her. I like Julian. I don't care about the romantic relationship anymore. My favorite character is Kit, who was not really in this book very much, but like I still loved Kit. But it's just like the story just felt really dragging. Like it didn't really feel like a lot happened until the very end, where like everything happened at once. And it's just like, I do like her writing and I do like the characters that she's written, but I just didn't really like this book. I just was reading it to have read it so I can read the next one, which is never a good way to read a book. If you don't know, The Lord of Shadows is the third series in the Shadowhunters Chronicles. If you don't know what the Shadowhunters Chronicles are about, it's all about these teenagers that are Shadowhunters and they fight demons in the middle of the night. This particular series is all about Emma and Julian, who are parapeti, which is like this special bond that Shadowhunters can have. And they're in love, but they're forbidden to be in love. And it's all about that and their institute where they live and the family and all this stuff. I will still be reading the next one, Queen of Air and Darkness, but I just didn't really like Lord of Shadows. I'm sorry, Mortal Instruments fans. I really wanted to like it. I just didn't like this one. I just didn't. The Rosie Project. Okay. So The Rosie Project is by Graham Simpson, I think is how you pronounce his name. He is an Australian author, I believe. And this is a book that I had to read for a university course. This book I just didn't like. It wasn't the writing style. The writing was actually really interesting and the character's point of view was also interesting. The main character has Asperger's. Asperger's, is that how you pronounce it? The problem I had was the misogyny. The main character's like, oh, I'm doing a life project where there's this extensive quiz to find the woman that's perfect for me, but he falls in love with the woman who's not perfect for him. My main problem was the protagonist's best friend, because he was misogynistic, wrapped up in a tight little bow. This character, this best friend, he was married, but him and his wife had an open marriage, which they both agreed to, but he wanted the open marriage because he wanted to conquer a woman from every nationality. And this best friend had a heavy influence over the protagonist, and it just, like, by the end I didn't want the characters to get together. I was like, you guys shouldn't be together. You don't deserve to be together. Like, it doesn't make sense. And so just, like, I just didn't like it. Like, I had to read it, and I wanted to like it. It was an easy read. It wasn't a bad read, but it just wasn't a good story. Reached. So the next series that I want to talk about is the Matched series by Ali Condé. Matched is comprised of Matched, Crossed, and Reached. It is a trilogy. I think there's only these 3 books, and I was just pretty indifferent to these ones. So the thing about Matched is it's a very typical trashy YA novel, and every now and then I like a good trashy YA novel. You know, I like having books that, you know, are just about romance, but these ones were just different. And I think my main problem with this series was that, like, I just didn't want the couple that was being pushed to actually get together. I wanted a different couple to get together. And I think that was a big problem that I had. And also just, like, the second book, Crossed, that it suffered from the sequel problem. And the third book was just sort of a whole lot of nothing. And it was just like, I just didn't really care. Matched, if you don't know, is all about this sort of, it's a futuristic, not dystopian, but it's a futuristic society where people are matched to be with the person that is perfect for them. And it's all like this perfect society, as you know all dystopian novels are. And this girl gets matched with someone, but when she checks who she's matched with to, like, see information about it, I don't know, she finds a different person there as well, and it makes her question pretty much all of society and how it works and the rules that they are forced to live under. And it's all about her sort of breaking away from their control and trying to be her own person, which is symbolized through all the covers. So in this cover, she's, you know, sitting in the perfect little glass container, content. In the second one, she's breaking out and she's smashed the glass. And in the third, so you can see the progression of her as a character throughout the covers, which I also think is cool. But yeah, as I said, I was just pretty indifferent to this series. It's not that I didn't like it, I just sort of, I wasn't a fan of the couple that ended up together, and the second book was just really boring, so that's why they're here. Why'd Sargasso Sea? Why'd Sargasso Sea by Jean Rhys is a book that I had to read for uni, and I just did not like it. This is sort of like a prequel / adaptation of Jane Eyre, which is a classic, and it follows sort of, you know, the crazy wife in Jane Eyre? Yeah, this is her. If you don't know, there's a crazy wife in Jane Eyre. It's not important. Actually, it's kind of important, but it's not important right now. It follows her, and it's just pretty boring. Like, it's just about her life beforehand and her life while married, and like how she goes crazy, which sounds really interesting, but when written down, it just really wasn't that interesting. And it wasn't bad, it was bad. I had to write an essay on it, and I didn't like it, so. But I did pretty well in the essay. I did well in the essay, so, you know, I understood the book, I just didn't like it. The Bonobo's Dream. The Bonobo's Dream was once again a book I had to read for uni, and the word that I would use to summarize this book is just weird. It is one of the weirdest books that I have ever read in my life. It's set in this weird future where, like, gas is toxic to humans and they have to live in this particular place in the world. Anyway, what happens is, like, they're all on these weird I don't even know how to describe this book. Okay, I don't know how to describe this book. It's too weird. But basically, the daughter brings home this bonobo, which, by the way, is like a gorilla ape thing that's, like, half human-ish, I guess. But his collar, like, that controls him, like, freaks out and goes off, and, like, he goes apeshit and crazy and stuff. And then, like, the system shuts down, and it's just... Look, it was a weird book. If you like really weird abstract books, you'd probably enjoy this, but if you don't like weird abstract books, just just don't bother. You've probably never heard of it before. And I think I know why. It won some competition, but like the problem is the part that won the competition was like the first half, and then she was forced to write the second half in like a month so they could release it as a proper novella, which just, it sort of ruined the way the story is. Like the first like half is just in one day, and then the next happens over a couple of months, and it's weird pacing, and it was weird. So I just didn't like it. I didn't hate it, but like I didn't like it. Court of Thorns and Roses. Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. Now, if you watch my other videos, you know that I really love the Throne of Glass series by Sarah J. Maas, and this is by the same author and follows more of the sort of fae aspect of the world that she's built, because they're in the same world, sort of, but this is more of the fae side. I didn't hate this book, but I didn't really love it as I was reading it, and while I probably will continue on with the series, I'm in no rush to do so. This is all about this girl who is a huntress, and she is sort of like fending to feed her family, and one day she accidentally kills a fae, and now she owes a life debt, or she owes something to the fae master, and he basically kidnaps her, takes her to the fae world, and all shit breaks loose, I guess. I don't really know. I can't really remember. I read it a while ago and I wasn't super invested. A lot of the story is basically just her learning about the fae world and learning about the guy that she's trapped there with, and it's just a whole lot of setup, I think, for the rest of the series, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It was just kind of really boring. There is obviously a love story involved, as there is with most young adult fictions, and a lot of people really love this series, so I'm eager to keep reading, but the first one I just wasn't super hyped about, I guess. It was just sort of like a book that I read that I didn't hate, but I didn't particularly enjoy, that I will continue to read the rest of the series of. If you love this book and you don't like that I don't like it, I'm sorry. I wanted to like it. I wanted so badly to like it. I hyped this up so much in my mind. And when I read it, it just didn't live up to the hype that I'd built, which is unfair to the book. I know, and I'm sorry, but I just can't help it. I can't help it. Fictions. So Fictions is by Jorge Luis Borges, I think is how it's pronounced. I think he's French. And this is a series of short stories, and it is one of the weirdest books I've ever read. Once again, I had to read it for uni, and I could not tell you what this book was about to save my life. I wrote an essay on this, and I don't know what this book was about. There is no plot to this book. It's just a bunch of short stories that some of them are like mythical and like non-existent. Like it talks about Babylon, and it talks about a lot of things. And it's just a series of short stories all piled together, and it was just pretty boring. Like everyone I talked to that read this book didn't like this book. I don't recommend reading it because it was just really boring. Tokyo Cancelled. Tokyo Cancelled is another book that I had to read for uni, and this one is probably more of an indifferent to a dislike. It was also a short story series. It was a bunch of people trapped in an airport overnight because all the flights had been cancelled, and they were just sort of swapping stories and, you know, trying to entertain themselves until they could leave to get to Tokyo. The stories themselves were like mostly interesting. Some were a little weird, but most of them were pretty interesting. The only sort of reason that it's in this list is because I just was not like invested in the book. I just was sort of reading it to have read it. Once again, never a good way to read a book, but I had to read it for uni. I had to write a comparative essay and compare it to Fictions, the last book I talked about. And so like I just wasn't super invested in the book, and the stories themselves weren't bad, but they weren't great. They were just sort of fairy tale type stories, and I'm just pretty indifferent to it. Like if you like short stories and sort of like weirder books, like you might like Tokyo Cancelled, but I just wasn't fussed. And the last book, I know what this is because there's only one book left, is the only book on this list that I genuinely hate, and it's A Death in the Family, My Struggle, Book 1. A Death in the Family, My Struggle, Book 1 is by Karl Ove Knausgaard, and once again, a university book. This is the reason that I didn't read for like 3 months, because I was trying to get through this book. This is a 600-page, non-chaptered biography translated from Norwegian, and it is the most boring book that I have ever read in my entire life. And it stressed me out because there were no chapters, there were just paragraphs, but the paragraphs would go on for like 6 pages, and I'm like, when am I going to be able to stop at the next paragraph? And I was like, this guy, he admits at the end of the book that he has a crap memory, but he has written 6 books about his life. And he like details like conversations and like moments in his life. I don't get it. I can't talk about this book without being so incredibly frustrated because I had to read this. I'm the only person, I think, in my class that actually read this book. Everyone else read like 2 pages and was like, I'm not reading this. This guy goes off on tangents for like 6 pages. Like, he'll be talking about one conversation he has, and then something in that conversation will remind him of something, and he'll talk about that something for 6 pages and then go back to the conversation. And like, how am I supposed to keep up with that? How am I supposed to enjoy this book? Look, I don't recommend you picking up this book unless you like really boring books about people talking about their life, because this was just boring as fuck. There is nothing else to say about this book. It was just boring. I hated it. It's the only book that I hated. And I'm going to put it down before I throw it across the room. So that's all the books that I have to talk about from all the books that I didn't like in the first half of 2018. If you haven't already, please watch the first part of this video, which is all the books that I loved in the first half of 2018. I will link that video down below, and it will also be linked at the end of this video. Don't forget to watch Karina's last video and our last group video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell icon. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up. I really hope you enjoyed it. I know I was sort of ranting a bit, but I mean, I still read a lot of books, and like some of these I didn't hate, but anyway, do give me a thumbs up if you liked it. Leave a comment down below. I love getting comments. I try to reply to everything, even if it's a couple days late. And I'll see you all for the next video. Bye bye!